Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast.
With the 10th pick in the 2024 NFL Draft, the Minnesota Vikings select J.J. McCarthy.
And there you have it. J.J. McCarthy went number 10 in the first round to the Minnesota Vikings last night, Thursday night. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. We're recording on Friday afternoon, so by now you've all heard that news. The pre-draft rumors surrounding JJ were all over the map. Jim said, don't be surprised if he goes number 1. Other analysts saw him moving up to number 3, maybe number 4. It seems though the majority of draft observers had him going somewhere in the top 10. It's been quite a crazy 2 months for JJ. When he declared for the draft in January, the majority of NFL analysts still had him as a fringe first-rounder. That all changed, of course, after the Combine, Pro Day, and numerous interviews. Today, NFL insiders are saying Minnesota is a perfect fit for JJ. So it will be fun to watch what happens next when training camp opens in July. This show will be live before the draft resumes this evening in Detroit Friday evening. In the next few days, we'll see if Michigan can match or exceed the 15 Georgia players drafted a few years ago, so it should be interesting to watch. On this week's Game Day segment, my guest is Josh Henschke from Rivals Maize and Blue Review. We taped prior to Thursday's draft, so our focus was on what we learned from spring practice and last Saturday's game. Josh joins me next here on The Michigan Man, so stay with us. Joining us on our Game Day segment this week is Josh Henschke from Rivals Maize and Blue Review. Once again, great to have you back with us, Josh.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, we are just days removed from the spring game, and it was, if nothing else, fun to watch. It always is. Like most observers, quarterback play was my focus. So let's start with Alex Orji. Your thoughts on what we saw from him on Saturday?
Yeah, I thought, he had his moments, the good and bad. I think you can kind of say that about all 4 of those guys, really. I think it's clear that he is one of the main guys in the race right now. He's able to make plays with his legs, which I think is extremely important, especially when plays break down. And was able to show a couple of nice plays with his arm, too, with placement and stuff. So I think he and J.J. McCarthy have a lot of similarities in terms of their development in regards to touch on their passes, placement and putting the right amount of, speed or throwing an off-speed pitch, so to speak, to receivers too. So I think if he can grasp that, he's going to have a excellent shot at starting. He looked good in spots. I think he had more good moments than bad, and I think there's a lot to like with his athleticism. But that's not really a secret because we've seen it before. But I'd be curious to see how that would be used on a bigger scale, really, because I would be shocked if he was kept off the field regardless of whether he starts or not next year.
You would think they're going to have packages for him, as you said, regardless of who else is in the game. But we know what he can do with his legs. As you said, we've seen that. That part of his game is intriguing as to how it can be used. The passing aspect of his game still needs work, as you mentioned. He has the arm strength, but when you watch him, I think layering passes over defenders, some of the downfield accuracy, and given it was very windy on Saturday, so I don't know how much we can put into that. But I guess with him, there are still more questions than answers, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the good thing right now is, you've got all of summer and then fall camp to kind of figure it out. But, he's definitely got the arm talent for sure. It's just, as you said, it's just kind of layering the passes and putting it where it needs to be. He had some moments, there's a couple of sideline passes that he made that looked really good. So the promise is there. And you can say that about a lot of the positions with Michigan this year. The promise is there. It just they need the experience and for it to show out to really prove what they have. But yeah, I mean, with Alex, it's definitely there. It just needs to kind of find that consistency.
Well, Davis Warren, I thought, showed good pocket presence. He was accurate. Joel Klatt mentioned that he seems to see the field very well. For the third straight spring game, he looked pretty darn good, didn't he?
Yeah, he's going to make a case too. I think from a passing aspect, he had the best day. I mean, he threw the deep ball, which, the funny thing that really Michigan hasn't really shown the last couple of years, considering who they had at quarterback. He was capable of throwing the deep ball, had a couple of really nice ones, especially one sticks out to me in particular is the throw he had to Deacon Tonielli off his back foot. I thought that was a really impressive throw. He's just a guy that's not going to go away. A guy that's scratching and clawing his way up the depth chart. And, I think it's abundantly clear that, him and Alex Orji are, going to duke it out for playing time. And it's abundantly clear that, the coaching staff would be very comfortable starting him. And I know a lot of people will reference last season and him struggling, but, you're talking about a guy who had injury to his throwing shoulder all year. So that kind of hindered his performance. So I think, again, it's kind of like the Alex Orji argument. If he can find his consistency, he's not going to be as athletic as Alex Orji, so he's not going to be making plays with his legs as often. So it kind of comes down to, whether Davis is more consistent, or do you value someone that can be creative when a play breaks down? So it's kind of an intriguing dynamic that those two guys have. And, you could make the argument that they could get away with a 2-quarterback system depending on, situation and games and things like that.
Well, we also got to see Jaden Davis in the big house for the first time, and Jaden Denegal got some reps. Your thoughts on what we saw from those two, Josh?
Yeah, there's a lot to like with Jaden Davis. I think, that ball he had to Peyton O'Leary on the run was right on the money. It was just an even better play by Jair Hill to break it up. There's a lot to like there. I think, there's the promise, and obviously he's going to need some time to develop. And, who knows if he'll see time this year at all, if there's an opportunity in late game situations, maybe. But yeah, there's a lot to like with Jaden Davis. I would not be surprised if we're talking about him as being a potential starter next year, because it's there. He just needs to kind of work on the arm strength a little bit. And again, comes down to consistency. I don't think he's going to have that athleticism like Alex Orji has. So again, it's kind of like the Davis Warren argument. If it depends on what are in your offense, but a lot to like there. In terms of Jaden Denegal too, I mean, he had his moments. He didn't have probably the best game to showcase what he's done during the spring. I know Kirk Campbell was pretty open after the game about him having a really bad start to the spring, but bouncing back, maybe just chalk it up to a bad day. But at this point of the year, and when you're at the place like Michigan coming off a national championship, you can't afford to have too many bad days if you want to be considered a starter. So that's another thing that's going to be developing. But as of right now, I think it's pretty clear that Alex Orji and Davis Warren are the two guys that are going to be duking it out for a starting spot.
Well, I know Coach Campbell said after the game they probably wouldn't look to the portal for another quarterback. Does that tell you he really likes what he has, or there just isn't anyone, at least so far in the portal, that you can plug in right away, make a starter, and win?
Probably a little bit of both. I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. If there's a guy that fits and they really like, they'd probably go after him. But at the same time, I don't really expect Kirk Campbell to be open about what their plans are. In terms of bringing in guys, because they don't want to say things publicly. Although he did mention that they liked wide receiver depth, but again, that's kind of obvious because the depth is paper thin there. So yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with fit too, but it's tough. The spring, you're not going to see too many big names enter the portal, at quarterback compared to, in December. So yeah, I think it is a little bit of both. I do think he likes what they have. I mean, he's been open about saying that he does like what they have. So, if it was the opposite being said where he was saying, yeah, we absolutely need quarterback help, then I think that kind of tells you where things are. But yeah, I think just from a personal opinion, I think he's comfortable where things are right now, and he'd like to see things develop heading into the fall.
Well, as far as the running game, I thought that looked pretty darn good on Saturday, and we know that this team is going to be able to run the football come September. Nice to see a bigger, healthier Donovan Edwards leading the way. He ran very hard, very powerfully. The rest of the running back room, they look pretty good too, didn't they?
Yeah, that's going to be a position of strength for sure for Michigan. Yeah, as you said, Donovan Edwards looks significantly bigger. I mean, it's noticeable, and that's going to help him, absorb that first tackle. And if he's able to get that into his, arsenal, so to speak, of the ability to make the first defender miss, he's going to have a great year. Yeah, ran hard. Looked good in his limited roles, and you could say the same for Kalel Mullins too. I mean, he looked good in his limited role, but the depth behind Mullins is what's interesting too, because they have guys there. Ben Hall in particular, Tavi Dunlap had a really good spring game too. So the depth is there, and I'm going to be interested to see how they kind of shuffle in that third running back role. I mean, Sherrone Moore made it clear that Ben Hall is currently the third running back, but Dunlap kind of made a surge towards the end of spring to kind of challenge him there. So I'll be curious to see how those snaps get divided, but a lot to like there. The depth is good, and you're going to be adding a couple of pieces in the fall, and Jordan Marshall and Micah Kapana later on once they arrived at campus. So the depth is there. They were finding holes. They were had a pretty good game. I mean, I think the running game was pretty good, all things considered, with the new offensive line, and not everyone was playing. So yeah, a lot to like. And if Donovan Edwards can stay healthy, he's set to have a pretty good year this year.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's too concerned about the running back room. I guess if I get questions, I've been getting these, I think, for the last 3 years, though, concerns about the receiving core room, and
yeah,
they've turned out pretty well. But we have Samaj Morgan, Tyler Morris back. Yes, they're young. Peyton O'Leary once again having a great spring, vying for time. But to me, seeing Kendrick Bell and Frederick Moore in action, that was encouraging, because it looks like they could be contributors down the road, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially Frederick Moore. I think he's, if the wide receiver room stays what it is throughout the rest of, the summer, and I think, they're going to need Frederick Moore this year, just kind of by default. But yeah, him making a play, multiple plays, is extremely encouraging, and I think he's definitely going to see some time. And Kendrick Bell is definitely an intriguing prospect as well. I think he's probably another year away development wise. I mean, I know Kurt Campbell said after the game he's probably a year behind of where Ronnie Bell was at his stage. So the depth there at wide receiver is paper thin. They can't afford any injuries if they aren't bringing in anyone in the portal. And I know Campbell said that he would like to add bodies through the transfer portal. So we'll kind of see. There's really none that stand out right now, but we'll see how that gets addressed. Yeah, I mean there's a lot of similar types of receivers, I guess. Not necessarily slot types, but guys that excel in the intermediate to short passing game. Guys like Tyler Morris, Samaj Morgan will obviously have a larger role as well. But yeah, I mean, it's I wouldn't say concerning, but that if the injury bug were to hit that room, they would be in trouble. Yeah. Yeah. if they're not adding anyone through the portal. I mean, it's young, yes, and who knows what that development looks like, but they certainly need bodies there, experienced bodies more specifically. If they're going to compete this year in the Big Ten.
Well, in the spring game, fans are always looking for signs of encouragement at every position. And to me on Saturday, what we saw at tight end was just that. I mean, we know what we're going to get from Colston Loveland, but Marlon Klein and Zach Marshall look like Michigan tight ends, and Deacon Tonelli, another one. So there is some depth and talent to work with there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I thought Marlon Klein had a really good game. That was kind of something that they really wanted to see from Klein. It's just they've said this for a couple of years now that he has all the talent in the world. They just kind of see that consistency put together, and by all accounts, it looked like he had that consistency during the game, which really encouraging because he's going to have a role. I know Steve Pasula said recently that he feels very comfortable playing Marlon Klein in any kind of situation right now, which is good news. So, and as you said, you already know what you're getting out of Colson Loveland. But so I think the big thing for them is that they want to see depth behind those two develop. As you mentioned, guys like Zach Marshall, Deacon Tonielli, they want to find consistency there. And, Tonielli had his moments. Marshall did too, and they kind of just want to see more of that happen. And, obviously we haven't really talked about Max Bredesen either, who's going to be, always reliable in his role. I mean, even though he's technically a fullback, he's kind of like a multi-dual position guy. So a lot to like at a tight end spot. They just kind of want to see consistency develop there. And if the spring game is any indicator, they're definitely well on their way.
Most fans are saying, man, if we have more guys like Colston Loveland coming, that type where you can slot them, you can put them outside. Very rare for a tight end to have that ability. But I think Marlon Klein and Zach Marshall in particular look like exactly that type of a tight end where you can keep moving them around.
Yeah, exactly. I think the coaching staff have been pretty open about, how Marlon Klein kind of has that freakish athleticism, the A.J. Barner type of role that they had last year. I think they've been challenging kind of where they want to see him pick it up a little bit. And I'll be curious to see how that develops here over the next couple of weeks. Their depth can develop. Definitely going to be life after Colston Loveland. And, those two guys can definitely lead the way for sure.
Well, gauging the offensive line play was tough on Saturday because of the split squads. But if you listen to Grant Newsome, you have to be encouraged. And I know coaches talk it up good during the spring, but he likes this group, doesn't he, Josh?
Yeah. And I do too. There's a lot to like there. Experience kind of at a minimum, but it's hard to say that Michigan doesn't have experience on the offensive line when they kind of really have experience on the offensive line at the same time. It's just not, you're not going to see like 15 game starts outside of, 3. But yeah, I think, the offensive line had a lot of hype around it during spring. And yeah, there was, some injuries and guys weren't playing. So it's kind of hard to, and obviously there's two teams that they were split between. So it's kind of hard to gauge, where things are at. I think they have a pretty good idea of who they want to start with their starting 5. And then, it's about building depth. I know Sharon Moore's been pretty open about, saying it takes 10 guys to go through a season because you never know what happens. And, we saw that last year a couple of times. So a lot of grizzled veterans who have waited their turn that'll be there day one and starting. And I think, there's a lot to like. I think what needs to happen now is just, that starting 5-6 guys just need some time to gel. And, we saw that last year too. Even, the familiar guys, the Zinters, the Keegans and Barnharts, and guys who have been around each other for years still needed time to gel. So, Rome wasn't built in a day, so to speak. So it's going to take a little bit of time and a little bit of, in-game experience for things to gel. But there's a lot of guys that they're excited about in the defensive line. I mentioned Greg Crippen has received a lot of hype as well. And he's another guy who no one would have blamed him if he were to transfer out. But here he is now in line to start and basically, writing his spot in the depth chart in pen. There's a lot to like with the offensive line. It was kind of unfortunate you didn't get to really see the whole group go at it on the spring game. But yeah, I mean, that you'll start to see a lot of that, come fall.
And again, based on what Sharon Moore said after the game, it sounds like for experience, maybe depth's sake, it wouldn't be surprising if Michigan added someone out of the portal, would it?
No, I wouldn't be at all surprised. Maybe a name that it just kind of would have to make sense, I think. I don't think they're wanting to add like a top tier defensive lineman and replace someone that's practiced as a starter all spring. It would kind of have to be someone that's, willing to, come in as maybe as a 6th guy or even, just push someone else in the starting spot. But yeah, I don't think they want to add someone just to add someone. And that really goes with any position on their roster. They don't want to add someone just to add someone. They want to have it make sense. And I think, since this run that they've been on, they've been very deliberate in that regard in terms of, who they add from the portal or what they look for out of the portal. So, I don't think offensive line is number one on their needs list, but if there's a guy out there that fits the bill, they'll definitely go after him for sure.
Well, over on the defensive side, we had heard all spring the defense was going to be championship caliber again, so we didn't need any convincing in the spring game, but they still looked pretty darn good, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of guys aren't playing. You're talking about Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, who, didn't really play, and you don't really need to. They could have sat out all spring and would have been fine. But yeah, again, it's all about building depth there, and they've been pretty open about that. A lot of excitement on the edges. I mean, you're talking about, Dominic Nichols, who made a play out of nowhere in the game that was super encouraging to see. Cameron Brandt, Trey Pierce, a lot of guys there that, haven't seen much time but are looking to get out there. I really like what they have on the defensive line, and obviously that starts with Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham, and I think that group is going to be elite. And now they just kind of need to build that depth outside of, the Derek Moores and the Josiah Stewarts. They need depth on the edge, because that's just what's been so good for them the last couple of years, is just that they have edge guys that they can, rotate in and out. Do they have that right now? Technically, yes, they do, but they don't have experience there. I mean, a guy like TJ Guy, who's been around forever, had a really good spring, and he's definitely going to translate that to time in the fall. So we'll kind of see. We'll see what happens. I think there's a lot to like, a lot of inexperience, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. There's a lot of talent there that they can rotate in. It's just whether they can be effective there. Considering how Michigan has developed defensive linemen over the last couple of years, and yeah, faces have changed. Elston isn't there anymore, and Zito is there. We'll kind of see how that changes. There are a lot of young youth there that they're hoping kind of takes a step forward, and that's, again, a similar theme across the board, not just on defense too, but on offense.
And one of the things I mentioned at the top of the show is fans in the spring game or during the spring period like to look for new names, young guys to watch on the horizon. I thought on the defensive side, Zeke Berry, he jumped out. He was all over the field. He had a good game.
Yeah, Zeke Berry had a great game, and that was exactly what Michigan was hoping for, with Zeke, especially, losing Ron Moore to injury and Keon Sabb hitting the portal. They needed someone to step up, and that's exactly what they got in Zeke Berry, and he's going to be a crucial part of that defensive back group this year, and someone that looks like they can rely on, which is huge, because they weren't sure if they had that yet, and that's not even factoring in Quentin Johnson returning, who didn't participate in the spring either. So there's guys there, and Zeke is one of those guys that you can kind of put in multiple spots, not necessarily, and he'll always kind of be unfairly compared to a Mikey Sainristil, because he's similar in that regard, that he can play multiple positions, and obviously no one is ever going to be Mike Sainristil, but whether fairly or unfairly, he's going to be compared to him in that regard. And he's a guy that that can play safety, that can play nickel, that can play slot, and do a bunch of different things for the defense, and they need that, considering they just lost DJ Waller to the portal, and who knows what they're going to do in regards to the future spot of that in the defensive backs, whether they add another portal guy or not. Yeah, I mean, Zeke Berry had a fantastic day, probably one of the more outstanding performances of the day, and definitely someone that they're going to rely on in multiple different spots, considering just because Michigan is just so multiple on defense.
Yeah, I think we saw so many talented youngsters out there on Saturday, and I know I don't have any concerns about the defense. If I have some concerns coming out of that game, it would be the kicking game. We know Tommy Doman is solid as a punter, but place kicking, that's another story, and it sounds like a concern for the staff. Adam Samaha, kid out of Gibraltar Carlson, downriver. I think he finished his senior year, though, at Ann Arbor Huron, as I recall, but I think he went to the Corn Blue camp and several other camps and was considered one of the best. And we just, in the last year, haven't heard that much about him as far as positive vibes, and it looked like he was struggling Saturday, didn't it?
Yeah, he didn't have his best day, and can you blame the wind? I'm not sure, and again, we didn't really. It's hard to judge a kicker in a spring game, especially because his chances were so limited. And yeah, he missed one. So it's kind of hard to, gauge whether, Michigan is in trouble with the kicking game or not. And, we know what Tommy Doman is. So They've got options there if that indeed turns into a position battle, a heated one. They've got Hudson Hollenbeck. I believe he was a transfer from Ole Miss last year that came in. He's also capable of kicking. I think ideally they would like Samaha to be the guy. I mean, if you use a scholarship on him, obviously you're hoping that, a guy like that turns into be your guy. And I kind of understand why they brought in James Turner last year, is because if you can avoid it, you don't typically want to have a true freshman kicker in there to begin with, throwing him to the fire in high pressure situations. So, giving him a year to develop was good. So, yeah, I mean, we'll kind of see. I mean, I think the ultimate tell really is whether they bring in someone from the portal or not. If they don't bring in anyone, I think that kind of tells you that they're willing to take a risk on Samaha and watching him develop, or at least the very least that they're confident in him. And, if they bring someone in, well, that tells you all you need to know about what they think about him. So I guess kind of time will tell in that regard. But, it's obvious that if they don't bring anyone in, then you're kind of expecting, or at least hoping, that what you saw in the spring game was kind of a one-off situation. I mean, you could make the argument that even James Turner was missing some bad ones early and eventually kind of turned it around and became a clutch kicker for Michigan. So, yeah, I'm not gonna sit here and tell you I'm super concerned about the kicking game because of how many kicks did he have, like 2 kicks all the spring game or something like that. It was 50%. I mean, yeah, would you have liked to have seen him make that chip shot? Yeah, but there's a lot of different other factors that go into it. So we'll see. I think you're right. I mean, he was one of the best kickers in his recruiting class. So he's there for a reason. So we'll kind of see how, things go in that regard, especially with, Michigan, whether they want to look into the portal or not.
Well, as you and I discussed before we started taping, and it's Thursday afternoon, the portal is open, and it is a two-way street. We've talked about needs Michigan can address if they choose to do so, but there is also the concern we might lose some kids. DJ Waller entered the portal this week. Jeremiah Beasley, surprisingly, the linebacker from Belleville, announced also on Thursday. And then just before you and I started taping, we had heard that Amir Herring, offensive lineman, was reportedly entering the portal. So that could still get interesting, couldn't it?
Yeah. I think, I always kind of am cautious when I talk about the portal, because literally something could happen 5 minutes after we get off the phone. If you were to tell me that, before the Harbaugh news came down that he left, that Keon Sabb, DJ Waller were the two, I guess, big departures that Michigan had from the portal, I would probably tell you, oh, well, that kind of stinks, but that's okay. I mean, obviously DJ Waller is a loss. That just losing those two, I mean, obviously, and Amir Herring and Beasley are involved in that too, but I think Michigan can survive those kind of losses, those depth hits. Adding a guy in the portal to replace Waller is fine, but when you're talking about a Beasley or a Herring, I mean, it's easy to find a like for like piece in the portal, or even just recruiting over a kid. I think that's kind of what the modern formula has to be these days. I mean, you either have to kind of over recruit in preparation for losing someone to the portal, or just seeing what you lose and then replacing them with guys in the portal, whether they're older guys or, a young guy that hits the portal and you can kind of replace them like for like. So that's just the modern era of, what we're in college football these days. You're going to have losses. And fortunately for Michigan, they can likely absorb some of these depth losses. I mean, what they can't afford is the top end talent, which, knock on wood right now, there hasn't been any that hit the portal outside of Keon Sabb. I mean, yeah, at the time you were thinking, okay, it's probably not that big of a loss, but now, when you factor in Rod Moore injuring his, ACL and he's done for the year, what's considered done for the year, now you're thinking, well, maybe Sabb was a bigger loss than we previously thought. But yeah, I think, Michigan's done a pretty good job of navigating this portal, and obviously there's six more days left in this window. So we'll kind of see what happens during the rest of this, but they've done a pretty good job keeping the band together, so to speak. So, yeah, I mean, with depth pieces and things like that, I mean, you just kind of have to prepare for it and just kind of have to assume it's going to happen every year. I mean, you're talking about an era where it's almost impossible that you don't have portal losses in your program. You're working miracles with your program because it's just everyone wants to find their own opportunity elsewhere if it comes up, and not even to mention tampering and things like that are happening. It's definitely out of control, but it's just that's the cost of doing business as a college football fan these days. And I have to deal with the losses and kind of react accordingly when those happen.
Well, that will be a hot topic continuing for the next 6 days. And when you read our message boards, the other hot topic is always recruiting. We know there is a lot of angst in the fan base right now. I hear it all the time. I'm sure you do. The last 3 cycles, not exactly what we would have hoped for given the success on the field. And 2025 has not by any means exploded yet. Are you optimistic Michigan is going to eventually put together a top-notch class in this cycle?
I am, yes. I think it just kind of needed time. I mean, you saw it with Nathaniel Marshall, came in and they did a great job of landing it. I mean, he definitely was not being predicted to drop, to commit when he visited, but Michigan has done a really good job. And that's kind of the thing with coaching changes and staff departures, is that you kind of have to start from ground level with relationships when you hire new guys, new position coaches and things like that. I mean, fortunately, on the offensive side, I mean, you've got a lot of familiar names there. But, when you're talking about running backs, you got Tony Alford coming in that has to start, from ground zero with a lot of places. So it just takes time. And it's kind of like to make a reference to basketball. It's like you kind of just need to see one go in, and then it gets rolling because you've got Nathaniel Marshall in, and now Avery Gatch is going to be announcing here next week, and that looks pretty good for Michigan. I know Michigan has got significant progress with Marquise Davis, a 4-star running back out of Ohio. So there's progress being made, and adding those 3 guys, those fringy top 100, 150 guys, especially, Nathaniel Marshall is a top 50 guy. There's progress being made. So, it's Michigan too is notoriously strong closers. I mean, last year their class was basically done by the end of summer. They kind of had early momentum, and then it kind of snowballed from there. And I kind of expect a similar busy summer, to come around. And once they get a couple of commits under their belt, they'll be rolling. I think they have a strong base already. I mean, Carter Smith, the quarterback commit, is doing a really good job recruiting, and he's going to be keeping guys together. So I am not concerned. I am optimistic considering ground they've made up. I mean, Marquise Davis wasn't even considering Michigan in the months between that lag time between, Harbaugh being hired, Mike Hart being absent from the program, and then Tony Alford coming in. I mean, Michigan wasn't even on his radar. And then Tony Alford came in, and now you're arguably talking about, if he were to announce today, it would be Michigan. So getting that across the line is huge, and they just need a couple just to get that ball rolling and get some eyeballs on the program, and then the rest should come together pretty well. So we'll kind of see what happens there. But I understand the lack of patience from the fan base considering what the program has done over the past couple of years. I get it. But, sometimes it just takes time, especially, when you have to start over in a lot of ways. Michigan's brought in a bunch of new faces on and off the field. So it just needs to take some time to gel. And if the recruiting momentum is to be believed, they're definitely finding that momentum and hitting their stride now. So I'm predicting a pretty busy summer for Michigan in that regard.
Well, final thought before we let you get away, Josh. It's been another crazy, fast-paced offseason for Michigan football. We're sort of getting used to that. Almost immediately after the national championship game, the program's future course changed direction, and it's been a lot to take in. I agree with that, and it's been in a very short period of time. Now we just wait for 4 months to tee it up for another season. Do you feel good about where the program is right now, given all the change?
I do. I came away from that spring game feeling much more optimistic about the team than I was coming in. I To be clear, I wasn't exactly, doomsdaying the team going into the spring game. I just thought there was a lot of questions that need to be answered, and absolutely all of them weren't answered in the spring game. But I think, if Michigan can find and develop some guys, some depth guys, I think they'll be just fine. I mean, I think if they can get good quarterback play, I think, they could be a 10 win team this year. I mean, and at the very least, I'm thinking, bottom, the worst case scenario is a 9-win team. And even then, 9 wins could possibly get you into the playoffs this year, considering the new format. So, I mean, yeah, it's definitely not an easy schedule, and they'll be tested early, but I think that's the best case for a young team is to be tested early and get battle tested. I definitely do feel optimistic about this team. I'll be curious to see what they do in regard to the portal, and if they can add some solid pieces, that'll probably make me feel even stronger about them being ready for the year. So, again, they'll need, they'll need some development of guys, and they'll need to have some questions still answered. But I definitely feel better about this program coming out of the spring than I was going into it.
I think a lot of people agree with you. Here with us today on our Game Day segment has been Josh Henschke from Rivals Maize and Blue Review, and you do such a great job over there, Josh. It is always a pleasure to have you on the show for us, and I know we'll have you back soon for another visit.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
On Quick Hits today, in the next couple of weeks, we'll take time to review the draft, catch up on recruiting news, which should be heating up, and even spend some time talking Michigan hoops, as Dusty May has been building his roster at a rapid pace. It even looks like this year's team could be very competitive in the Big Ten. In May, we start our off-season program schedule of 2 shows a month. We'll stay with that until August, when we resume regular weekly programming in advance of another football season, and it will be here before we know it. Our next show will air on May 15th, if you'd like to mark that on your calendar. That will do it for now, though. Have a great couple of Wolverine weeks, everyone. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!